Again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Liberty Watch. I'm Liberty Man Van, your host, and today we're going to
We are also taking strong measures to protect our nation from radical Islamic terrorism. According to data provided by the Department of Justice, the vast majority of individuals convicted of terrorism and terrorism-related offenses since 9/11 came here from outside of our country. We have seen the attacks at home, from Boston to San Bernardino to the Pentagon, and yes, even the World Trade Center.
In this clip, we see Trump trying to do something about terrorism. I think that's a good thing, to try to help limit terrorism. His initial ban included the countries, initial travel ban included the countries of Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and the Yemen. Weren't most of the 9/11 attackers from Saudi Arabia? Why aren't they on the list? Could it be because we have a real cozy relationship with them? And if you want to limit terrorism, could we maybe just look at possibility that the United States having military forces in so many different countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen. I'm sure I'm leaving some out. And let's see, President Obama's drone strike program, wasn't there a little collateral damage? Yeah, there was some collateral damage in some of these attacks where we're going after terrorists. We ended up blowing a few innocent people up. We had this really benign term for it, collateral damage. I remember one of those drone strikes actually hit a wedding party. Yeah. Think if you were getting married and you had your whole family there, it's a time of joy, and some drone swoops down out of the sky and takes a couple of your family members out. I don't know, might you get a little bit upset about that? We need to look at our foreign policy and about poking our nose in everybody else's business. That is part of the problem here, and unless we acknowledge it, things are not going to get any better.
I am greatly honored to have Maureen Scalia with us in the gallery tonight. Thank you, Maureen. Her late great husband, Antonin Scalia, will forever be a symbol of American justice. To fill his seat, we have chosen Judge Neil Gorsuch, a man of incredible skill and deep devotion to the law. He was confirmed unanimously by the Court of Appeals, and I am asking the Senate to swiftly approve his nomination.
Now, this Gorsuch is a really good pick for a Supreme Court judge. Excellent choice. He's a constitutional conservative. He believes in applying the original intent of the Constitution. The original intent means that you don't rewrite it according to what you want it to say. You look at the way the Founding Fathers intended it in the debates in the Constitutional Convention, and also in the ratifying debates before the Constitution was ratified. We have all that before us. We can look at it and see what the original intent of the Constitution is, and that's the way we should interpret it. Now, there are some progressives who do not agree with this concept at all. They have this idea of a living Constitution. Let's have a look at it now.
Judge Gorsuch has also stated that he believes judges should look to the original public meaning of the Constitution when they decide what a provision of the Constitution means. I firmly believe the American Constitution is a living document intended to evolve as our country evolves.
Now, this idea of a living Constitution sounds kind of attractive on the surface. I mean, we know things now that they could have never even imagined back then. So we should be able to reinterpret it according to modern times, right? Folks, this idea is poison. It's poison because if you can just reinterpret the Constitution any old way you want, then you can rewrite it on the fly. And so you might as well just tear it up and burn it. It doesn't have any effect. You're not following the Constitution anymore if you can just rewrite it on a whim. The Founding Fathers, they knew that we would come upon new circumstances. For example, we would one day have the conscience that we didn't want to enslave people. We wouldn't allow it anymore. So what happens? We have a constitutional amendment that gives blacks freedom, right? So they put a mechanism in there for us to make changes going forward as the times change. That's what constitutional amendments are for. Now, why is that not good enough for the progressives? Because it requires a lot of consensus. Not only do you have to get a constitutional amendment before the state legislatures for them to vote on, but then 2/3 of the state legislatures have to agree with it. That's a high bar, okay? So it's not easy to make changes, and the progressives want to make changes easily. That's why they make up this false idea of a living Constitution. It's a big lie, it's poison, and we should reject it.
In the last 8 years, the past administration has put on more new debt than nearly all of the other presidents combined. Right now, American companies are taxed at one of the highest rates anywhere in the world. My economic team is developing historic tax reform that will reduce the tax rate on our companies so they can compete and thrive anywhere and with anyone. It will be a big, big cut.
Hooray! Tax cuts! That's a great thing. You know, I think taxes should be eliminated altogether. I believe we should voluntarily contribute to government instead of having it coerced from us, but I'm not going to get my way anytime soon. So how about tax cuts? Great thing. However, I've looked at his budget, his initial proposal for the budget, and if you're going to cut taxes, you also need to cut spending. Otherwise, the deficit's going to increase and the national debt's just going to continue to explode. So tax cuts, great, but what's happened is Trump, his initial proposal for the budget, it does nothing about the entitlement programs. Those continue on unabated. And if we're really going to address the deficit and the debt, the federal debt, we're going to have to look at entitlements at some point. But nobody has the political guts to do that. So what does Trump do instead? Well, he chips away at some of the so-called discretionary spending, and so he cuts about $50 billion out of discretionary spending, but he increases, that's part of the discretionary spending. The military is also included in discretionary spending. Not only does he not do anything about military spending, he increases it by $50 billion. So the $50 billion he cut, add back the $50 billion more he wants to spend on the military, and you haven't done anything to address the federal budget deficit. So this is not going to do anything. This is not helpful. I agree with the tax cuts, but we also need to have spending cuts.
It's been a long time since we had fair trade. The first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, warned that the abandonment of the protective policy by the American government will produce want and ruin among our people. Lincoln was right, and it's time we heeded his advice and his words.
This is a terrible idea, protectionism. And to want to emulate, to choose President Lincoln as your model for economics is a horrible choice. Lincoln was in favor of what he called the American system, which was protectionism and protecting certain industries. It was nothing more than the old mercantilist system that had been used back in Britain and France and so forth centuries ago. It didn't work then. It wasn't going to work in Lincoln's time, and it won't work today. This idea of protectionism is just going to hurt some companies. What if you're an importer? What if you're in the import business? Now we raise tariffs. Well, that's going to hurt your business if you're in the import business. And it also opens the door wide open for crony capitalism. Which industries are we going to protect the most? Oh gosh, Mr. Trump, I'm in the milk industry, and aren't you running for re-election? Here, we'd like to contribute to your campaign, and would you please put a high tariff on that imported milk to, so that we can continue to thrive? Oh, you needed a couple of more million? No problem here. You're just opening it up. All this protection, politicians love it because it brings all the special interest groups up to their door to make political contributions. That's why the politicians like it. Reject it. It's not good for business, and it's a bad idea.
To launch our national rebuilding, I will be asking Congress to approve legislation that produces a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure of the United States, financed through both public and private capital, creating millions of new jobs.
This idea that infrastructure spending is going to create new jobs is a big, big lie. Now, let's explain why. We've gone over this before. But if you're going to spend $1 trillion, okay, where's it going to come from? Well, it's going to come from taxes, right? You're either going to have to tax people now, or you're going to have to borrow it. And borrowing is just a tax on the future generations. So, you're going to have to tax people to come over here to spend it on Caterpillar or concrete or steel. You know, all those industries are going to come out smelling like a rose. It's going to help them. But these people you got the $1 trillion from, see, they were going to spend that on something of their choosing. Maybe they're going to spend it on a new suit. Maybe they're going to spend it on a new car, or make a down payment on a house. See, so you're just taking it away from one area of the economy and moving it into another. It doesn't create any jobs. That's a big, big lie.
First, we should ensure that Americans with pre-existing conditions.
Folks, the Republicans are not serious about repealing Obamacare. After Obamacare was initially passed, it was so unpopular that at the next election, the Republicans regained control of the Congress. So after they regained control of Congress, what did they do? Obama was still president. Well, what they did is they passed this legislation and put it on the president's desk that repealed Obamacare, knowing full well that the president wasn't going to sign it. So this was symbolism over substance. Politicians do this all the time. They weren't serious about repealing Obamacare. They knew he would veto it. Okay? Now that they have Congress and the president, they have the votes to repeal Obamacare. They're not going to do it. Why? Because there are too many Republicans who were rhinos. Okay? That's Republicans in name only. They're just like the Democrats. They believe in big spending. They believe in big government programs. And they don't want to repeal it deep down inside. They're not serious about it. The other thing that tells me they're not serious about it is this provision the president just talked about pre-existing conditions. You can't keep that provision in there and throw out all the rest. You just can't. So this tells me they're not really serious about repealing this bill. And the legislation that they proposed, now since the president's speech here, we're a few weeks past now, and we've already gotten to a stage where the Republicans tried to ram this Obamacare Light's what I call it, because there's just not a whole lot of difference between it and Obamacare. They tried to ram it through, but there was a group of Republicans called the Freedom Caucus who, had just figured out this is really just like Obamacare. It's Obamacare with a different name, so they just refused to vote for it, so the thing's dead. So Ryan, Trump and company are going to have to start over again. And I don't think they're going to do anything that seriously changes what Obamacare does.
Megan's story is about the unbounded power of a father's love for a daughter. But our slow and burdensome approval process at the Food and Drug Administration keeps too many advances, like the one that saved Megan's life, from reaching those in need. If we slash the restraints, not just at the FDA, but across our government, then we will be blessed with far more miracles just like Megan.
This is a good thing. We should streamline the FDA process and give patients more choice. The FDA process now is so cumbersome that it costs over $1 billion to bring a new drug to market. That's why your drugs cost so much, is because the FDA approval process is way too rigorous. There's got to be a happy medium between, protecting patients from harmful drugs and killing patients because drugs aren't available soon enough. And right now we're erring on the side of too much caution. See, the incentives for the FDA, unfortunately, here's how it works. If they bring a drug to market too soon and it injures people, well, people can sue the FDA. It's their fault, right? So they tend to err on the side of caution. And here's what happens when they err on the side of too much caution, which in my opinion they're doing now, is you have drugs that could be available to help people, but because it's so cumbersome to get a drug through that process and it takes so long, in the meantime, a lot of people are dying that could have been helped by these drugs where they're getting approved more quickly. But what happens in that case to the FDA? Well, all these people that are dying because the drug is not available, the FDA doesn't get blamed for that because we don't know their names. We don't know who they are. But if they approve one too quick and they die, we know who they are and we know their names. So that's why you have a situation where they're just way too cautious in bringing these drugs to market, and we need to change the process.
I am calling upon members of both parties to pass an education bill that funds school choice for disadvantaged youth, including millions of African American and Latino children. These families should be free to choose the public, private, charter, magnet, religious, or homeschool that is right for them.
This is good. This is a move in the right direction. The current system leaves school officials in control rather than parents and children. Now, you can go to your local school board and complain, but there's no guarantee they're going to do anything about what your complaint is. But what if you can vote with your feet? What if you don't like the way this school is doing things, so you put your child in another school? That's voting with your feet. Well, you can't do that now with public education, not unless you want to pay twice. You're already paying, in our community we use property taxes to fund the schools. So you're already paying with your property taxes to send people to school. Now, if you want to put your kids in a private school, you're going to have to pay twice. And that's not right. The way this should work is that parents should be in control of that money. If we're going to use public education, public funding of education, you should give the parents that money and let them spend it wherever they want to. If they don't like the job the public school is doing, then they can send that money to a private school. It should be their choice. That would make the public schools more responsive to the needs of the parents. Right now, you got the superintendent and the school board. They're in control of everything because they're getting the money. People who got the money got the control. Give the money to the parents. He who pays the piper calls the tune. If the parents are controlling those dollars, then they're going to pay attention to how it's spent. And if they don't like this new $30 million stadium that they just put in at the local high school, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but multi-million-dollar football stadium, and they don't think that football's all that important, and they want to send their kid to a school over here that stresses academics rather than athletics, then they should be allowed to do so. Why do we have a monopoly? Why is a monopoly bad for every other business? If you go and ask somebody, is the monopoly a good thing? Should we have a monopoly? Should we only have one place to eat a meal out? Only one restaurant in town? Or only one shoe store in town? People are going to say, and rightfully so, they'll say, well, no, that's horrible. If you only have one place to eat, the food's probably going to be terrible because I can't take my money and go somewhere else. Well, what incentive do they have? You know, do they really have to make good food? I mean, I can complain about it, but I really can't not give my money to them because it's already been given to them. And if I want to eat, I have to pay twice if I want to eat somewhere else. Why is a monopoly bad in everything except except in education? Can somebody that's so opposed to giving parents and children choices, please explain that to me? You can't. And that's the show for today. Thanks for joining us on Liberty Watch, where we don't believe you need some guy with a bullhorn to tell you what to do. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend would like to grow the show. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
That's all, folks.